After that devastating earthquake, we built this building out of the rubble. We made the concrete out of the rubble of Christchurch, and it's designed as a community facility to hold exhibitions. We designed a concrete building sitting on an earthquake tray. This is the gold standard of earthquake design. You put your whole building on a rubberized ball-bearing basement with a gap around it. So if there's an earthquake in the future, the whole building is insulated and cushioned. We were amazed that the total carbon footprint of this building was, in 150 years, was still less than a single 747 going from New Zealand to the UK and back once with 250 people on board.
As you know, I have a very clear mission with Building Green, and I know so many brilliant architects, interior designers, and contractors who do too, but they're still stuck working on projects that drain them, with clients who don't value what they bring. That's why we founded Market Your Architecture a year ago. It's a marketing agency that helps mission-driven designers attract better clients, charge what they are worth, and finally build the kind of portfolio that reflects who they really are. If that sounds like the shift you need, there's a link in the description to marketyourarchitecture.com. And before we jump into the podcast, please rate and subscribe. It really helps me reach more people like you. In a world increasingly facing the challenges of climate change, with the Building Green podcast, we will dive deep into the intersection of architecture, design, urbanism, and environmental responsibility. I'm Ladina Schipp, your host. I've been an architect and building site manager for the past 10 years. During my studies at ETH in Switzerland, as well as in my working environment, I've had many touchpoints with sustainability, like many of you, I guess. I've also learned to question what I've been told, which is why I decided to go deeper into the topic and uncover what sustainability actually means. My mission is to highlight the transformative power of sustainable architecture, not just as a practice, but as a catalyst for broader societal change. Subscribe for more of our content and enjoy the show. Andrew Patterson has spent his life designing buildings that don't just sit on the land, they belong to it, like they've always been there. As the founder of Patterson Associates, one of New Zealand's most renowned architecture firms, Andrew's philosophy is guided by a simple but powerful idea that architecture is a natural extension of the earth, its patterns, and its people. Whether it's a cliffside lodge, a museum built from earthquake rubble, or a tiny cottage blending into the coastal rock, his work is rooted in beauty, permanence, and respect for the planet. In this episode, we explore why true sustainability starts with beauty, how buildings can be a pattern of the landscape, and why every architect, urban or rural, must learn to think beyond style and into meaningful design. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today. I've been waiting for this moment since I interviewed William, and he talked so nicely about you and your project.
Thank you, Ladina. I'm really honored to be here, and I really enjoy your podcast and your work.
Thank you. So, Andrew, your buildings are quite poetic, I would say, grounded and somehow spiritual. Before we get into what you build today, I would love to go back. What shaped you and how did your journey really begin?
I'm a New Zealander, Aotearoa. We live down on the bottom of the world in the last country settled. New Zealand's bigger than about the same size as California, maybe a bit smaller, somewhere between Japan and California. And it's remote in that it's separated by oceans, on all sides. So it was the land of birds. The only mammal was a bat, and its primeval forest was untouched. And it was settled only less than 1,000 years ago, around 800 years ago. The first people came here, and it because of its remoteness, it kind of has been able to get back to the roots, and I think that's been a huge benefit in my life, growing up in such a place.
That's beautiful. And As an architect, what's the first space you ever remember falling in love with, and why?
What happened to me is I graduated as a young architect, and in New Zealand, because it's so underpopulated, there are wonderful, wonderful landscapes everywhere, natural landscapes everywhere. It is untouched in a lot of ways, and um, I had to develop some philosophy to put buildings in the place, because inevitably you're always asking, should you put a building here, and should you be doing this at all, and what justification have you got? Because it's unlikely that you can make the place better. And after a couple of projects, I came across a, a a bay in the northern part of New Zealand, which I used the money that I had saved in those projects, and I bought the piece of land. It had two beaches on it, a beautiful little island, and because I fell in love with it, it was even remote for New Zealand. And I discovered on it, and my family's been here for generations, and we grew up very close to one of the main pre-European centres in the country, and we're very bicultural. But I found on this spot that there'd been a village and a fort long abandoned, and its name is Te which means place first settled. So it was one of the first places settled in New Zealand 800, 900 years ago. The bush and the jungle had grown right over it. And I pieced together the plan. There must have been 500 people living on this, maybe 1,000 people living in this beautiful coast. And I pieced together the plan of the village uh, through the archaeological remains. And I discovered that the people who were living in this place 800 years ago were having the most beautiful life, a way more beautiful life than I was having in this modern technological age. I mean, the ocean was full of thriving fish. The houses were laid out just gorgeously for the sun and the view and privacy. The paths, there were no steps. The paths were ramps in the nicest places. The trees were enormous and shady. It was protected. There were springs of fresh water bubbling out of the ground. Um, the views were amazing. It was egalitarian. You could tell just by the layout of the village, and and it made me think, why? How has life improved? And I mean, I love our life in the 21st century, and it's wonderful that we can do podcasts, and we can use AI, and and it's exciting, but um, it, the actual quality of their lives was undeniably better. And that kind of started my thinking on how I was going to be an architect and what I should do to be an architect. The main creation story in um, ancient pre-Judeo-Christian cultures is quite different from our Western creation story, where God created us and plonked us on the planet, and off we go. In a lot of I kind of say earth cultures, or early cultures, people believe that they were a natural part of the planet. And in Maoridom, they are the children of a sky father and an earth mother. And New Zealand is known as the land of earthquakes. It was called the Shaky Isles for about 100 years. And these two, sky and earth, are locked in a conjugal embrace. and we are all the children of that. And with that is a feeling of being a natural part of the planet, a natural part of the system of the planet. And with that comes some attitudes and responsibilities and respect for your mother and your father and that continuity of life. And with that, also for me gives a sense of belonging and um, a sense of we are as natural and have the same right to be here as the birds and the trees and the fish. And that gives a kind of confidence, a confidence to do the right thing, and a confidence to be in a system. It's quite different because it kind of relieved me of the worry and the guilt that pervades a lot of modern life in this age of depletion of resources and sustainability. So it made me a much happier guy, and I was and it's been a really a nice principle to found your attitude on.
That's a beautiful time travel. So in simple words, what is Patterson Associates known for? What do people come to you for? Like, what's your mission?
They come to us because our buildings have a sense of belonging. I think it's probably a better question to ask the people who come to us. We're doing projects around the world now, and we're doing projects throughout New Zealand itself, of course.
How would you say is Patterson shaping the future of architecture?
Well, I hope that we are able to bring architecture back into its roots a little. I mean, architecture for me is simply the rearranging of land, natural materials, stone, concrete, to be better suited to human life and habitation. And you can see that connection between landscape and architecture, even in cities, is often the generator of the most beautiful buildings. I mean, if you go to really ancient buildings, for instance, classical buildings in Greece and Rome and Egypt, you'll see that the buildings are actually just blocks of stone cut out of the site and reassembled for, for people to live in. And often they're assembled out of materials the blocks of stone that can be rejigged into different shapes and different forms by different generations. And inevitably those buildings look picturesque and they have a sense of belonging. They're supposed to be there. So I guess our underlying philosophy is that buildings are a natural extension of ourselves as human beings, and we are a natural extension of the planet. And if our buildings feel like they belong and they're comfortable in their place, then people will feel a sense of belonging and comfort on the planet as well.
That's a very beautiful point of view. So before we go into your project, you have been with your company for almost 40 years. What's your
Well,
secret?
you don't have to remind me. I don't think it's quite 40 years. But yeah, it's a long-term game, architecture, because projects take a long time to be thought about and then consented and then built. Often an architectural project will take 5 years, sometimes 10 years in the making. There's a wise kind of a maxim about architecture is architects do their best work in late in life, and they keep working. And yeah, Frank Lloyd Wright, did the Guggenheim in his late 80s. On each continent, there's so, and you can see the reason why, because it takes a long time. It's not to gain that experience and to get anything built in the first place.
Yeah, that's true. The reason why I'm asking is because I also run a marketing agency for architects. And one of our clients just recently, like last week, told me, I would love to hear from a successful architect what the secret is. So I thought I'd pass on the question to you. What's been the key to building something that lasts and that actually makes an impact?
I think it's beauty, and that's an overworked word. But if people, you can make your building as sustainable as you like, but if unless the beauty is somehow intrinsically in the building, then people will not love it, and they will not treasure it, and it won't be sustainable. It will be demolished at some point. Even 30 years later from our first buildings, that's one of the advantages of living, being in such a slow moving profession. You get projects from it, and even though they were designed in a different time, in a different environment, they a building, I think, has to have that longevity, has to be intrinsically beautiful and flexible. And I think the key is understanding that longevity.
Do you see a shift in what beauty means to you or your clients?
Beauty is quite an interesting thing. There's, of course, in today's world, we think of beauty as in the eye of the beholder. And so everybody has a different idea of beauty. If you're into V8 cars, you're going to find a Mustang the most beautiful thing in the world. If you're into that's a learnt beauty, if you like. There's been different philosophies over the ages. I mean, Kant and the thinkers of the 19th century and earlier thought of beauty as truth. Beauty equals truth. And before that, beauty was associated with proportion in classical architecture, and that proportion was usually based on the proportions of the human body, which define beauty. And that's also very relevant because we find the proportions of the human body attractive, and a building that's in those proportions, naturally we find them attractive. It's part of our deep DNA. So beauty has changed, but I like Hans Gell's theory of beauty a lot. So he's a quantum physicist, very famous guy, and he said, strangely, the test for a correct scientific theory is beauty. 25 years before they discovered the Higgs boson and they invented the collider, they knew it existed. And he said they knew it existed because of beauty. And he defines beauty in four things: intrinsic beauty. He says it's universal. So gravity will drop an apple as much as it revolves the moon around the planet. So beauty is universal, and it's true in all cases. He says that beauty is the simplest possible expression. Okay, so if you're working on a scientific theory and it's complex, you get it simpler and you get it simpler. You know it's getting more correct because it's getting more beautiful as it gets simpler. Clarity. If you can recognize it, it will be much more beautiful than it confuses you or it's a mystery, even to your subconscious. And symmetry. So Hans Gell was saying that to be beautiful, something has got to equal another, and that's best probably explained in a scientific equation that one side equals another. And in architecture, symmetry can occur in lots of different ways. So it's a search for universal beauty, if you like, lasting beauty that is universal to everybody, not necessarily just the eye of the beholder, but universal through the ages.
Do you think beauty is temporary or can it evolve?
You mean, can something be beautiful and then not beautiful as it decays? I think things that decay can be beautiful. I think a ruin of an old building can be extremely haunting and beautiful, and something being built can be beautiful.
And can something be considered beautiful now, but maybe not in 20 years?
That's definitely eye of the beholder. So, for instance, in architecture, if you are designing a building for a certain age, for instance, if you're designing your building to look like a photocopier machine, or in Corbusier's case, to join the age of the automobile, then you risk in future generations it not being meaningful, because we just don't use photocopies anymore. So so I do think that if you design your buildings on temporary artifacts, yes, they will lose beauty for future generations as those artifacts disappear. I mean, history buffs will know that it was designed to resemble a photocopier, but that's it. Yeah. So searching for true sustainability in buildings probably needs to transcend fads. And I'll give you an example of that in how you can do it, because I think it's a connection to something that is universal and sustainable. So if you take the Sydney Opera House on Sydney's harbour, which is commonly regarded as one of the most beautiful buildings in the world, and you in your mind's eye you plop that building and you put it on a Montana farm. Okay, it's not beautiful anymore. It's beautiful because of the connection to the harbour and the sails on the harbour and the freedom of the harbour and its place in Australian culture, and its connection to the art and its place in the city. So it's beautiful because of its connections rather and location, rather than intrinsically beautiful.
You said before, in order to be sustainable, it has to at least be beautiful. Do you think the perception of beautiful can be influenced?
Yes, definitely. Is that often, and I don't know if you've had this experience, you can look at a painting and not find it beautiful at all, but then you start to hear other people's views of the painting, and you start to hear the history of the painting, and you start to understand what the painter wanted to achieve with that painting, and it can become beautiful as you learn about it. That's definitely an experience I've had, and I'm sure lots of people have had.
That's beautiful. So I want to start to talk about a project William mentioned in his episode when he spoke about you very, very highly. And that's the Ravenscar House Museum. So in 2011, Christchurch was hit by a massive earthquake, right? And what followed was actually a wave of demolition that erased a huge part of the city's architectural history. And one of the most meaningful responses to that was the Ravenscar House Museum, which, again, William told me about. And he said his all-time favorite project. Can you tell me a bit about that project and what's your biggest lesson from designing it?
It's a little museum. And after that devastating earthquake, the colonial neo-Gothic centre of the city was all demolished en masse in big piles of rubble. And one of the biggest houses in the city was part of that demolition. It was the largest single insurance payout for a residential home at the time, and an elderly couple decided they did not want to rebuild their house. They would rather use the insurance money to provide a building for the city to help the city in the future. So they decided that they would build a museum for the city, and we wondered what to do about this building in the aftermath of the earthquake. So we designed a concrete building sitting on an earthquake tray. So this is the gold standard of earthquake design. You put your whole building on a rubberized ball bearing basement. So if there's an earthquake with a gap around it, so if there's an earthquake in the future, the whole building is insulated and cushioned. Um, and the other lesson, and this is kind of an interesting one, I think, maybe for some of your listeners, in terms of the kind of tick box sustainability that we get nowadays, I think is the main answer to your question. What I learned, so leads and other certifications are a really noble way to go about sustainability, and engineering design and strengthening and connections and detailing is also and standards for beams and structure is also a very empirical way of going about sustainability. But the things that really survived the earthquake were the symmetrical things, because the weight of the building is evenly distributed, and that's not something that you can um, put into a tick box. It's part of beauty. And the building, if you've got a symmetrical, evenly weighted building, um, it's much more likely to survive an earthquake than one that may be over engineered. So we built this building out of the rubble. We made the concrete out of the rubble of Christchurch. We selected from rubble piles, and it's a concrete building made out of the rubble of Christchurch, and it's designed as a community facility to hold exhibitions, art, culture, receptions. It's a tiny building. It's about as big as a house, and it won Best Cultural Building in the World Architectural Festival last year, which is the most prestigious of the categories there, against very large flash opera houses and museums around the world, art galleries around the world. So we were really chuffed, and it is symmetrical in weight, and it'll be there for 500, maybe 1,000 years, because it's built of totally solid concrete materials, and we hope that it's beautiful enough that people treasure it, and it will be lasting. And a little fun fact: we worked out the carbon embodied and sequestered, and the carbon that it generated, and we were amazed that the total carbon footprint of this building was, in 150 years, was still less than a single 747 going from New Zealand to the UK and back once, with 250 people on board. So that kind of put it in perspective for us, that we could create a building that would be there for 150 people, have thousands and thousands and thousands and generations of human beings through it, and still not have an effect on the planet, anything like a single round trip to the UK on an airplane.
That's crazy. That really does put it into perspective. Did you think about alternative materials, or was concrete actually the most sustainable material because it was built out of the city's ruins?
It was certainly more sustainable than building it using aggregate from the city's ruins, but concrete is, as you well know, one of the least sustainable building materials. But it is also one of the most permanent materials. So it's a balance. It's very much a balance. Now we did life cycle analysis, and we could have built the building out of timber, which has a much lower carbon footprint and has a lot more embodied carbon in it. We found that by doing that, the building would probably maybe last 100 years, maybe more, maybe more. The issue for us in doing it was we wouldn't get that true sustainability that was the building's intention. So we made it a kind of exception at this point, and we made it out. We decided to make it out of the rubble instead.
Just a quick reality check. If you're constantly over delivering, working around the clock, and still chasing the right kind of projects, you're not alone. I keep meeting architects, interior designers, and contractors in that exact cycle, which is actually why we started Market Your Architecture. We help you reposition your work and get in front of more of the right people so you can finally choose who you want to work with. If that sounds interesting to you and you want to know more about us, you'll find the link to marketyourarchitecture.com in the description. Witnessing that loss, not just from the earthquake, but from the way the aftermath was handled, destroying everything, how did that change the way you think about permanence in architecture?
It's interesting. In our country here, architecture combines Western and pre-Western concepts. For instance, the Tuawi property I was talking about, which I'm custodian of, all the buildings were what we would term fabric buildings. So they were made every couple of years from Raupo reeds, the main thatching material of the time, and rebuilt. They were completely impermanent, and they rotted away, and they needed constant rebuilding as a almost like a maintenance. And rebuilt again and again. Their foundations, of course, weren't, and their platforms weren't. The siding was sustainable, and there's still those pieces are still here today, just as levels in the ground. But Western architecture it has the attitude of permanence being a quality, one of the three founding qualities of architecture coming from Vitruvius. Vitruvius's tests for architecture are still used today, and they are permanence, a commodity which is fit for purpose, and delight, which is really beauty. So it kind of those two opposites are a debate we have all the time in the office, and both are have their place but it's about an individual project.
Definitely. It actually reminds me of a conversation I had recently with an architect in the US. He told me that buildings here, like the typical family homes, are built to last 15 years. And it's totally normal for him. He plans with that in mind. He knows that in 15 years, he's going to move houses and build a new one. And that was actually shocking for me because coming from Switzerland or from Europe, buildings there last hundreds and hundreds of years. My grandparents have been in the exact same house for the last 50 years. And we were talking about the fact that Americans might build for the normal life and we build for worst case scenarios. So we build for that very bad storm, for earthquakes and whatsoever. So in the end, we are also kind of overbuilding, right? So what is more sustainable?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I think that is a debate that's going to keep going. Our housing here is only certified to last 40 years. It's only ever built for 40 years, and our commercial buildings aren't much better. I think that is ultimately unsustainable, and I think that Europe kind of proves that. Because it's about if you can get quality buildings, you can get on with something else in your life.
So I want to move on to another project. You mentioned the opera in Sydney before, and actually the Seascape Honeymoon Cottage reminds me of another project of Jörn Utzon, a house in Mallorca. I don't know if you're familiar with the project. Both frame the view in very specific ways so that each space feels intentional and unique. How did you even get such a project? Was it a client's brief or is that something you were looking for?
This is one of those projects that it's sited in a remote a remote cove that faces down to the Antarctic. It is really it's only accessed by farm road, which is about a 15-kilometer farm road, rough track, or by helicopter. And the cove is beautiful. It's a little wee amphitheater cove that the dolphins come into and play. There's always sea life. There's always birds. There's seals. The kelp moves the water. You can see 50 feet to the bottom. Um, and it's a spectacular, beautiful, intimate place. And that should we be putting a building here at all? Is the question. Yeah. So how do you do that? Because you can't, as a human in a natural part of the planet, really is the place that you want to be. This place. We chose to put a very small, partially underground building that is like a rock, like a little rock formation on the side of the bay, well back, and enable people to actually come and experience this place overnight and in all weathers. When the Antarctic storms roll into those beautiful hot days where the air just hangs and it's still, and the surf rolls in on this rocky beach right beside you. So how to do it is first to fall in love with the place and then decide how you can actually contribute to the place rather than detract from it. Yeah.
That's beautiful. How can you bring that experience through architecture?
Well, the architecture becomes a vehicle, doesn't it, to connect with the natural landscape and become one. And we are part of that holistic natural part of the planet. Yeah. How do you do that? Yeah. And so in answer to your question, this is a tiny cottage. It's a single room, which is also a bedroom and a living room, and it has a bathroom and a couple of lobbies and airlocks to keep the weather out. It's got a great big glass wall that faces the sea and the bays, and it all shelters under a big earthquake-proof concrete roof to deflect falling debris from the banks and hills around it in case of an earthquake. And there are two views from the bay. One was what they called the comb, which is a spire of rock in the sea just offshore, and the beach itself, which forms a lovely curve in front. So the plan of the building is complicated, and it's almost like two cottages that have been morphed into one. One cottage looks at the comb, and one cottage looks at the beach. And between the two layouts, you get this very big space for such a small building.
And if we're looking at the construction side, how do you even build sustainably? What were the key challenges in bringing materials there, transport, setting up the construction site?
Yeah, well, there was no chance of getting ready-made concrete delivered, so the concrete had to be mixed on site. We used local rock, quarried the actual rock that the cove was made out of to clad the building. The farm is sustainable in the energy anyway because of the hydro plants on it, and in fact, the entire South Island of New Zealand is sustainable in terms of energy because it's all mainly hydro or geothermal, so it's all natural, sustainably generated. The water as well. The water is a resource from the farm. So it just took a while, and construction had to be based around the weather and the access and also the farming, the lambing. We had to close the site for 3 months every year for the lambing. It took a couple of years. So it was just with a lot of love and attention and craft.
All of your projects are really aging into the land and disappearing into the land. What does that mean to you specifically for a project to disappear into the land?
Well, I don't think it's disappearing. It's just forming a pattern in the landscape. It is a pattern of the landscape. That's a fundamental philosophy we have in our thinking. So, in our age, intelligence, AI intelligence, and the intelligence that generates things like leads or our rules is imperial, but human beings actually think in patterns. Our brains are actually, I don't know if analog is the right word, but we think in patterns, and beauty is a pattern. We look at something, and then we see something else that reminds us of that pattern, and we think it's beautiful, or it's most useful in our warning system, isn't it? We have a scare crossing the road by hitting by a car, and we know the pattern. Our brain reacts automatically to that pattern, and we have a fear and flight reaction. The idea behind a lot of our work is thinking in patterns. And so if the building is part of the pattern, it's going to feel part of the place.
What do you think architecture should do to celebrate the landscape?
I think the architecture is a part of us, and it should allow us to celebrate the landscape. It should facilitate our connection. And I'm talking about urbanscapes as well. We do a lot of urban buildings as well. So the sense of well-being that you can get by walking through a landscape, which is scientifically proven, you can get through walking just as well, getting by walking through a quality built environment. I mean, some of your European cities are amazingly cathartic to walk through. In the same way, walking through a national park. So architecture has a real role in grounding us, and I think Gelman's ideas on beauty apply to that as well. If a place has a logic to it, has a connection and a sense of belonging to it, is simple, is beautiful, then it's going to affect your life in that way.
And how do you build in those remote places without being intrusive?
You've got to be very careful during construction. So you've got to keep your waste and your water contained on the site, and you've got to, if you're doing earthworks, you don't want that earth running through the natural water course. If you're disturbing, you want to be able to put it back exactly how you found it. With that seascape house, it came with a reforestry project that reforested the bay how it was, 200 years ago, in native timbers and native trees and plants, and fenced it for the stock. So, and construct it, the construction period in the life of the building is quite brief. It's a couple of years. The building should last for hundreds of years. It's also very important to get the design of the building in the same way. And I'm not saying that a solution of kind of blending in on the landscape is invariably and universally the right way to go. Some buildings that sit out of the landscape, like the Sydney Opera House, are also have a sense of belonging and a sense of logic and a sense of being there. That can be equally as wonderful, but it's the connection between people and the environment, whether it's a natural environment or a city environment, people in place, that creates a sense of belonging.
It is a difficult question. There's no checklist you can follow to create something beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's a pattern. It's designing as a in pattern and a concept that connects to a logic and brings lots of things together into something that's meaningful and has clarity and can be recognized.
What can architects building in the urban environment learn from you?
In Western architecture, we take a natural landscape often, and then we rearrange that landscape, and then the next generation rearranges it again, and then they build on that, and then they build on that. And then you can see that in an architectural style. So you can see the first buildings have much more landscape generated, and then as the years have gone on in Europe, hundreds of years in some cases, um, uh, architects then started to respond more to the built landscape because they're building in the built landscape, and then you can then respond again to that built landscape. So buildings it can just be based on other buildings, and that's what architects do a lot. And that's at the end of the day, that's called style. We build in a style of a building that's gone before. It can be very beautiful, but it also has a problem with a kind of systemic failure. And each time you do place a style on top of another style, you get further away from the roots of architecture. So I think even building in a city environment, it's really nice to explore and be cognizant of the underlying natural landscape that was, as much as the built environment that you're responding to it now.
That's a very beautiful answer. Andrew, I have one last question for you. What is your favorite project or structure from around the world?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask, which everybody asks an architect, what's your favorite building that you've designed? And I always reply, the one I'm working on right now, which is true.
So tell me about it.
What the one I'm working on right now?
Yeah.
Well, yesterday I was in a really beautiful landscape, doing a lodge, a hotel. It's a big boulder cliff landscape, probably 60 rooms. How to insert that in this quite fragile landscape, because the whole purpose of people going there is to experience the landscape, and how do you insert that kind of facility into that landscape without ruining the environment that everybody's going there for, and create a wonderful, comfortable, waterproof, secure experience for people. So I'm focused on that.
Are you familiar with the architects Luxury Frontiers? Their founder, Graham Labe, was on the podcast with me. They focus on hospitality in very remote places. And we talked a lot about luxury in hospitality. Luxury has kind of evolved in hospitality. If we're talking about luxury in remote places, it's about the connection to nature and not about a marble interior design, you know?
Yeah, I'm sure I would concur with that philosophy.
Yeah, definitely. I think I should connect you too.
Yeah.
Andrew, thank you so much. You have been an amazing guest. It's been very interesting talking to you. If our listeners want to follow your work, where can they find you?
They can find us on Instagram at Patterson Associates, or myself at Andrew Patterson Architect, or they can look at our website, which is pattersons.com. Or they can search us and under Patterson Architect, and it'll come up with a lot of our buildings.
And they should definitely watch your YouTube videos with local projects.
Yeah. Local project has a lot of our residential work on it. You can see that seascape house because it's hard to talk, isn't it? In architecture, you really want to see it, and ultimately you really want to be there.
That's the next step. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you for bringing me on the show.
A huge thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to the podcast to support me and so you don't miss an episode. And while you're there, I'd also be so grateful if you could rate and review us. If you have any guest suggestions or any feedback, you can find me on the socials at Ladina Schipf. Thanks.